So I see we have some people online, and since I'm late, we probably don't have to wait that much longer. So perhaps a quick round the table while I figure out how to share my slides here. I could go first. My name is Tim Alberg. I work in the Ericsson OSPO, and among the things I do is OpenChain and this telco specific work group call as I'm sharing. Been with Ericsson now for 8 years. LinkedIn kind of reminded me, feels like a lifetime. Other than that, I previously worked with the Ericsson's IP and licensing operations, but now fully with the OSPO. So any volunteers to go next?
Sure, I'll go next. My name is Mary Matron. I work for Continental Automotive. We're starting our OpenChain journey. I've worked with open source for like the last 6 years and came into it brand new and learned a lot in the process. I would not call myself a compliance expert, like the licenses, but everything else around open source, you know, how to do reviews and all that kind of stuff is more my focus.
I can go next.
I wouldn't call myself an expert either. You constantly learn stuff in this profession, I found.
Yeah.
So I'm Steve Cobain. I work for Analog Devices. I'm in the automotive group, although Analog Devices does have interests in the telecom sector as well. So I'm trying to keep abreast of all the OpenChain groups. I'm leading part of our open source journey as well, trying to get an OSPO established, trying to get to a situation where we can be OpenChain compliant, all that kind of good stuff. So I'm mainly listening along to various calls to see what the best practices are. So I'm mainly here to learn things.
Okay, maybe I go next because I have my video on. So yeah, I'm Jari, and I guess I have met most of, if not all of you before. But yeah, like why I'm here at the telco, I have quite a few years experience from Nokia, but I was on the mobile phone side there. But I think I started '95 and I was at Nokia until 2007, so it makes 12 years. But you know, first years I was as a trainee, etc., etc. But yeah, like, and open source, I became more familiar from from compliance side, because I was open source due diligence lead at Cisco's, and I did that stuff. It was my main hat about 8 years, and 8 years and around 50 deals under my belt. So I guess I know at least what one can come across with acquisition side. You know, I know pretty well. Let me throw the ball to who hasn't spoken yet? Takashi-san.
Hi, thank you, Yari-san. Hi, my name is Takashi Ninjoji, and from Toshiba. I'm a member of the Software Engineering Center at Toshiba, and I'm working on open source compliance. And okay, so I'm also a member of the OpenChain Japan work group, and I'm also a leader of the tooling subgroup of the Japan work group. Mainly, my focus is interested in the OSPO and also the best practice of the open source compliance, and also the S1 how to consume it. So I'm really happy to hear and join these meetings. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Takashi-san. We're so glad to have you. Just a quick question. Am I succeeding with screen share? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. I only have the one screen today. So you know, if you write in the chat, I will not be able to see it. So if there's comments, questions, or something, please shout out. shall we address it? Or is that everyone on the call, or did we miss someone? No one is complaining that they have not been able to introduce themselves, at least. So I assume that will be everyone. So that covers the first portion here, the welcome and around the table. So it's good to see this diverse crowd. I think that it's sort of the right people with the right background we have here. I see some overlap with the meeting we had some weeks back. That was in unfortunately in a time zone that doesn't really work for the US. So the idea of this meeting is there will be a lot of the same. We'll go over the material we did then, sort of create the same exercise of what's our mission, what's our goal, see that there's alignment, and ensure that everyone has the possibility to speak up before we move on. And as I said, if at any time any questions, please shout out and we'll address them at once, I think. But really for this telco group, the thing we have the idea with and what seems to be an industry alignment with, at least starting, is around the software bill of material, the SBOM. And I think that most will agree that just having an SBOM format, it's not really a competitive advantage. One SBOM format is probably not going to be better than another once you have it. So it's better to avoid fragmentation in the industry. That only drives cost and complexity, both on the consumption and the distribution side. So if we can have sort of one SBOM unified in the industry, I think that's a good thing. That would save everyone in complexity. This group do not aim to change OpenChain. OpenChain and what we do here in the telco work group, that they're complementary. If we decide, if we actually come up with a common SBOM format, I think that sits on top, or sort of as an expansion pack on top of OpenChain. So they're complementary. We don't aim to change OpenChain. We don't aim to, at this point, make additions to OpenChain, but you should be able to be, use this format even though you're not OpenChain conformant. So it's not a requirement that your company is OpenChain conformant to adopt unified SBOM format, or whatever we decide to call it. Unified is more of a working term. But to adopt this, you shouldn't need to be OpenChain conformant. It's good if you are, and that brings further value, I think, but it's not a hard requirement. And really the vision here is that we'll have one software bill of material in from a supplier, and that same software bill of material is something we can send out to customers if we integrate that component in a product. With that, I'll stop for everyone to collect their thoughts and see if we have anyone who have any thoughts at the moment on what's just been said.
Yeah, this is Chris Wood. I wasn't able to unmute myself before. Now I remember how to do it. Hey, so I've been in the open source space and working software licensing and vulnerability for about 15, 20 years now. And so we have always created an SBOM, but it's always been our own internal type SBOM. Our biggest problem with both the open source software out of the repositories and from vendors is that we don't get any SBOM. So in my opinion, I think that some SBOM that meets the needs of your organization or company is probably a lot better information than we were all getting previously. And it will help us to build our final product SBOM if we're incorporating software into our software, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks for sharing that. No, that makes total sense for us. And to be perfectly frank, what goes on the Ericsson side is we see the same problem, that sometimes we do not receive an SBOM, or once we do, it could be in various different formats that it takes some to a lot of manual labor to sort of translate it into our internal format, and something we can ship to our customers. And then at the other end of that, we of course have our customers, where we're starting to see requests for, shall we call them, custom SBOMs. So customers want adaptations to the SBOM, not necessarily on sort of what metadata or so is included, but the format it's presented in, how it's shipped to them, how the data is presented. All of that is, of course, adding complexity. If we, on each end of sort of our software cycle, have to translate that all the time, that complicates matters. So that's sort of the background problem that at least we have been facing, and that we would like to address. And sort of for the telco industry, for us, it sort of had made sense to at least start here. Perhaps there's a larger interest beyond the telco industry to pick something like this up, and we certainly shouldn't exclude that. But it made sense to start in sort of this field. So I saw that we had someone from Continental with us. I mean, if the automotive industry would like to pick up this, then that's fantastic. The more sort of market traction you can get for something like that, the better. And it's not just, and the nature of software, it's not just related to one industry most of the time. So it's going to be reusable. We had BMW on our first call, and they were also enthusiastic about the idea. So I think there's probably cross-industry relevance. So don't feel excluded if you don't self-identify as a telco or a telco company. I think that it's probably a concern that goes beyond this. Anyone else want to share anything at this stage? Otherwise, we can move on to further slides.
In my experience, we have had various customers asking for open source listings and things like that. But to date, in my experience, every time they've requested that, it's usually been, they've provided us with some Excel spreadsheet, said, please fill this in. So they're asking for a bill of materials, but not in any uniform kind of format. Are other people seeing standardization of the format with their customers moving towards things like SPDX, or is it still freeform?
I think that on our end, we're seeing consistency with some customers, but then with other customers, between various business units and various sort of affiliates of those customers, we're not seeing very much consistency at all, and sometimes even contradictions. But as you say, the Excel spreadsheet is one way of doing things that we have seen, and a method often presented to us, but seldom sort of filled out to any degree of accuracy, we have found.
Yeah, I would agree with that from personal observation, because I work a lot with both commercial off-the-shelf software as well as open source and freeware software, and there is so much inconsistency in it. You almost have to call up the vendor and get them to interpret what they've sent you, if they sent you anything. Even Microsoft, I had a conversation with them the other day and asked them about their SBOM, and I asked them if that was what they were intending with their third-party licenses list that they had in the package. And they explained that, no, that's not an SBOM, but they didn't say that they had one. So it's kind of really catch as catch can right now. There are a few companies out there in our industry that are creating SBOMs when they have to share their software with partners or suppliers or the customers.
Mm.
But let me ask you a question here. How is an SBOM, or how is the SBOM different from SPDX? Is it just the format? Is the SBOM in Excel and SPDX is XML?
Well,
the fields are the same, or what?
Well, we're currently incorporating Cyclone DX as an SBOM generator in our build platforms. We're trying it to see how it works. We had a home built one, but we're going to try and go with more of an industry standard one, and it incorporates a lot of the SPDX licenses where they're so noted in the software, but where they're not noted in the software, they generally revert back to the industry standard licenses that have been improved by OSI or one of those type organizations. That's my observation.
Okay.
So I would see SPDX as a possible data format for an SBOM. So this could be, the data format it's presented in, but the SBOM is more the complete packaging of that information.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference that we see in industry is a lot of people, when they refer to SPDX and they say they're using SPDX, they're actually just referring back to the SPDX license listings, and they're not referring back to the SPDX software bomb tool. So I think that might lead to a little bit of confusion out there when somebody says, are you SPDX compliant? They say, yeah, we're using SPDX licensing.
I have the other word.
Sorry, Jimmy, you were breaking at least on my end.
Is the audio on?
Your audio's coming and going.
Yeah. Am I breaking up or was it Chris?
Yes. No, you were.
All right. All right. Sorry. Then the audio issue on my end. I'll see if I can do something about that. I'll try to connect to a better network. Sorry. So I'll reconnect.
Well, you sound good now.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem now.
All right. Okay, then it might be a bandwidth issue that I can't share my screen and talk at the same time.
Yeah, you're currently, Jimmy, your camera is turned on, but the cover is closed. So you're sending a blank screen, as it were. That'll be using some of your bandwidth.
Let's turn off that and see if that will help.
There we go, camera off now.
Okay. And we'll go back to screen sharing. Let's see, because when we did this meeting the last time, we went through a little exercise on sort of defining goals here for what would we like this group to accomplish. And I think from gathering from these discussions, it feels like it's more people than I and the people on the last call that feel the need or that feel it would be beneficial to have some sort of standardization to the SBOM, and then standardization going beyond just saying that we use SPDX as the data format. Is that a correct interpretation of sort of what the group is saying?
That's kind of what I indicated. This is Chris. Because using SPDX as your format when you're creating your software and you annotate MIT and then put SPDX in there so that everybody knows that's the exact license you're talking about is great. And it's been real helpful in the past. But having a common tool that generates or at least a format for a tool so that the format that everybody's seeing from their SBOMs is similar, I think is really a good goal. That's my opinion.
For me, it feels like it's reducing unnecessary complexity if one could achieve that. I'm just taking some notes here, and then we can compare it to what we talked about in the other meeting we had. I think we'll probably find a lot of similarities, and hopefully some new things will come up as well. So feel free to sort of chime in with things you'd like to see here on sort of what the goal should be. I guess I can myself bring up one thing, and that is sort of, should this be, just should we align on just the format, or should we also in this voluntary thing also include if it should be SPDX or Cyclone DX as the data format then? Or is that taking it too far?
I think that's taking it too far, personally.
Yeah, I agree. Because you've got to remember that every individual organization that's generating software, whether it's for automotive or space or medical, pharmaceutical, or so forth, all have different customers who might be requesting different things. And we've just gotten here in the US the new executive order, which kind of specifies exactly what they'd like to see in it. So, other organizations or government organizations are liable to do the same thing around the world. So specifying a specific SBOM tool might be good, but I think it's going to lead to a lot of pain.
Well, there's a difference between SBOM tool and SBOM format.
Yes.
But the executive order does specifically call out SPDX or Cyclone DX or what's the other one? Is it software tags? I can't remember. The third one is even more complicated. So I'm discounting it for my own purposes, but they do specify 3 formats.
And then there's of course, I think what the automotive group went for, it was SPDX Lite, if I remember correctly, or that was an output from the automotive group at least. But of course, things should be fit for purpose. I don't think we should necessarily specify a tool. I think on sort of how I see things, it's probably, I would probably prefer to specify it down to, use this version of SPDX, because that would sort of simplify my imagined workflow. But I don't think we at this point should lock us down into, either of SPDX or Cyclone DX or something else. And for that matter, we probably shouldn't lock us down to if we should be tying us into one of those, or if we should remain agnostic if it's SPDX or Cyclone DX.
Yeah.
Well, locking down to a tool doesn't leave a lot of room for, new technology, new tools, or anything like that. So.
Yeah, you're right on the money. I agree with that.
Okay, so the consensus of this group is at least agnostic to if it's SPDX or Cyclone DX. That's the format. But are we are we having an appetite then for actually tool creation, or just specifying, what a potential tool should output, if I put it like that?
output and input, because the ultimate aim is that you don't have any, or you have minimum human interaction and translation here. So you receive from upstream something you can read in your existing tools, whatever those tools happen to be, and you output something that can be read by the tools of your downstream people.
Yes, I'm taking that down. Another point before I forget it, and that's the point I left here, is that for this group, we're imagining that the material we create will be under CC0, attribution share alike. License, is that something that would be fine with all the participants here, or do we prefer something else as the output, at least for documentation we create? If this would eventually evolve into tool creation, then of course we would choose something more suiting for that.
Yes, that seems fine to me.
Good.
Yeah, that's good with me.
Good. We had quite some discussion on that in the other meeting, so I'm glad that was an easy decision here.
Did they come to the same resolution?
Eventually, yes, except
Okay,
for one
right.
gentleman who would get back to us on that point.
Okay.
For me, it's also sort of what file format should be outputted. Should the output be, Excel? Should the output be a JSON file? Should it be a PDF, or a clay tablet? I'm currently agnostic to all of those, but do the group feel that it would be useful to have a defined format? If I want to consume something, I probably want that at least somewhat standardized, which the format is, or the file formats.
Yeah, I think somebody mentioned that a few minutes ago, and I really think that whatever file format is there, you need to be able to consume it so that you can incorporate it or understand it in your system.
And then taking into account that to some degree specify, the tools used, but that's the cost of doing business in these things to some degree, I think. Then
that's why we hire people to write APIs.
Exactly.
Yeah, I guess if we have some standard, I don't know, like XML or whatever format, it should be fairly straightforward to translate that to some other format as well.
That will most likely be the case. So I'm just putting all of these things are of course TBDs, but I think this is probably worth pointing out that it's a to be decided on sort of what file format, but at least there's a need for it. Then another thing that's come up in some discussions is if should there be a standard way of delivering these, or is that specifying things too far? I.e., do we want in whatever specification or standard we create here, or best practices we create here, should we say that it should the SBOM should be delivered digitally, either via file server fetching or some other way of doing it?
Well, it certainly should be delivered in a machine readable format, as in you don't want somebody faxing it to you.
Yeah,
believe me, I've had that happen actually.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah,
I would not be surprised if somebody would have a Word document that contains an image that contains a screenshot of some output that's just plain text. So yes.
Yeah, we've seen that.
But machine readable is the important thing here. You know, so you can generate it and you can read it directly with your tools.
And I think it needs to accompany the documentation, or it needs to be included in the documentation that accompanies the actual object you're distributing, whether it's a library file, binary file, or an entire application. It should not be embedded in the application where I've seen them.
Sorry, could you repeat the first part of that? That sounded perfect, and I want to make sure I capture it.
The SBOM should accompany the distribution either in the documentation or as a standalone document that doesn't, sometimes you get installation documentation or user manuals and those sort of things that are outside the binary component. And it just needs to accompany the binary, but it does not need to be embedded. In fact, it shouldn't be actually embedded in your deliverable. It should accompany it. And electronically, like somebody just mentioned.
That's an interesting point, because it's common practice with cloud services and software as a service that one of the options for the service is to deliver the related license notifications, particularly for front ends on web services.
Do they deliver it as an accompanying document? Or
I don't know.
I'll take that down as a good thought here, if we should specifically address cloud deployment use cases.
Well, the point is that it should be a separate document, even if it's part of the entire deliverable, right? So
yes, that's what I was saying.
Executable, so it should not be embedded in your executable.
Correct. That's my thought too.
So I'm curious what you mean by embedded and executable and what the concern is. For example, I see nothing wrong if you're delivering software where the installer also installs your SBOM as a file that is part of your resulting installed software. You would still have a separate executable and so on, but as you get all you get one installer that provides your SBOM, your license, your executable, all your sources that are necessary for delivery, etc. Do you see problems with that as an approach?
I think we're looking for a separate file that we can do things with outside of the executable software. Like sure, if it's embedded in the executable, so somebody can read it online, like in your car, you can, on your center console screen, you can find all the software licenses in there, but it's a big long list. And as a development group, you can't do anything with that the way that is, right?
Okay,
so
right. I see what you mean.
I think that's the point, is you want to have some separate document that you can, modify, edit, put through a tool to convert it to a different format or whatever you need to do with it, but it needs to be in a standalone document.
Right. And
so maybe that bullet that ends but not embedded in the executable should say not only embedded in the executable.
That's a good put. We use the SBOMs when they're available during our procurement process before we've even purchased the software, because we want to know what the licensing is that makes up that application, especially if we're going to use it as a development application, to make sure that we're not inserting viral software into the software that we're building, or that it doesn't have a non-commercial use license embedded in there. I mean, there are things that we look for to make sure that the software does not contain those elements before we'll even purchase it, if it's COTS. And if it's open source software, we discover that during the licensing certification process using the licensing industry standard licensing tools. And if we find those bad licenses, then we just tell the requester that they can't have that software. So I really do think it needs to be separate and not only embedded, as Mary just mentioned, in the executable.
Yeah, I think I captured that here, and I fully share that concern. And it's of course a necessity that it can be transacted apart from the software. You know, I shouldn't have to consume all of the software just to get to the SBOM. I should be able to say, I'm interested in this software. I'd like to look at SBOM for it. And be able to read that then, or at least input that into whatever tool I'm using and getting a human readable version of that. So that I understand.
And from another point of view, you can't accept the license for a software until you've actually seen the license for the software. So you have to be able to accept it before you've reached a point where you've installed it or purchased it, whatever.
But it would probably be good, when comparing, if one is looking to source COTS. I mean, this would be one metric to compare them, right? Looking at the attached SBOMs before one makes a purchase decision. So I think Chris were talking about also that was one thing they did before, and if this is something that could simplify that, it makes it simpler to compare software. It's of course, if we were to have this standard format, it would of course be beneficial to have that. If I'm comparing software without an SBOM or an SBOM that doesn't follow this format, it's of course preferable for me from an administrative point of view to consume the software with the SBOM I can understand and that I can look at before I make any decisions to actually purchase the COTS. Do we have other things that we sort of should bring in here and that we think that it would be good to take into the discussions on a possible SBOM standard or harmonization of SBOMs? Don't feel limited by the amount of dots here. I can easily add more. There's plenty more colors.
I have an item, and maybe this is just my lack of knowledge here, but I'm wondering how is an SBOM and like a defined format or defined set of fields for an SBOM, how is that different from the SPDX 2.2 or SPDX Lite formats, right? Because in the end, we're defining what fields, and for each item we want this set of fields. So how are they different? So either maybe we need to make that clear, like what is the difference between an SBOM and an SPDX file, and when would you use each one? What would be the use cases? What are the overlaps and differences?
Well, an SBOM is the data, and SPDX is a standard for expressing that data. It's one standard.
Yeah, so an SBOM can certainly be in SPDX format. Express the data in that format. Then then there's all these other things we discussed as well, sort of what file format is it consumable for me in, and as pointed here, it should accompany the documentation rather than be embedded. That's of course, the SBOM could be embedded or it could be so, but I think the standard here goes into specifying to that level of detail. Then and it's I think even with people who use SPDX, it's differences in sort of the output. I mean, we face sometimes with people who tell us that they have SPDX output, and when we try to read it, we can see it's SPDX data format, but it's not really what we were expecting or sort of in something we can easily consume for ourselves. Either because the file format is wrong or it's just jumbled, or and any numbers of things could be, but you're definitely onto something, that it's not, we're not doing anything revolutionary beyond SPDX. I would say it's sort of, we're specifying sort of a best practice use of or a standardized use of SPDX or another data format, just so that people use it in the same fashion, and that the SPDX standard really doesn't go into any detail on. It just specifies the data format, not the use of that data format and how that is delivered.
Okay.
I don't know if that clarified or if it only confused, but that's sort of my view on it, at least. So we're not developing another SPDX in this. It's sort of, this is just something relatively easy that we could relatively easily agree upon. That's the assumption, at least, that we could do this, and it would be relatively uncontroversial, and it would make the lives of everyone who consumes large amount of open source a lot easier, and large amount of costs for that matter, if the sub-suppliers starts using it as well, to make everyone's lives a lot easier if what we get in is sort of immediately available as output as well, assuming you trust the data that you'll be getting. So as long as you sort of trust your supplier, that I trust that the SBOM I get from you is accurate in terms of what's actually in the software. As long as I trust that, I can then take the file you gave me and I can punt that towards my end customer if I'm integrating your work into something larger here.
Right, and so I posted 2 links about relating to SPDX Lite in the chat. So one is the specification of SPDX Lite, and obviously, so the tags is limited to from the SPDX ordinary tags, because SPDX Lite mainly focuses on the package level of granularity, you may see. And the second link is the example of the SPDX Lite in the spreadsheet format.
Thank you, Takashi. Those are very useful links. And I believe that it was the automotive group, and especially the Japanese auto manufacturers, that were responsible for developing SPDX Lite. So perhaps that's something to consider as well, if that's something that's needed in this project. I don't think that we necessarily want to go that route, but I'm certainly open if someone feels that neither SPDX, Cyclone DX, or any of the other alternatives on the market are sufficient, or perhaps they're too advanced even. Then if we need to go the route of doing an SPDX Lite of any of this, then I think that's great that the automotive group have shown how how one could go about that, and that there is such a path. Cognizant of time, I'll compile these notes into some sort of comprehensible minutes of meeting, and I wanted to touch on sort of what we discussed in the previous meeting that we had in the European Asian time zone, where we discussed data formats. I think that in that call there was a larger appetite to actually specify a data format, because I think that was the dynamic in that group, but I don't think it's something we're hardly locked down to, and one could specify, if you're doing Cyclone DX, then you should be doing X, Y, and Z. If you're doing SPDX, then you need to do 1, 2, 3 instead, or you essentially do the same thing, and the whole standard remains agnostic to it. Then sort of how would one create a single SBOM from several SBOMs? I have multiple COTS and I have multiple products developed in my company, each with separate SBOMs. How to merge them in a simple and comprehensive way. Then we also discussed that there needs to be human readable formats as well as machine readable formats, and that's related to the compliance artifacts. Then file format to deliver, that's again that's a to be D there as well, but some alternatives were discussed. Then let's see. Well, I think the was also a discussion on sort of if you need 2 sets of informations, if sort of 1 upstream and 1 downstream set of informations, that would be useful or not. But I think that together with this call, I think that there's plenty to work on for the telco group going forward, and I hope that all of you wish to be involved to some degree in the group, and our ideas for meetings going forward is that starting next year, sometime when people are back from their holidays, is that we'll start a rotating schedule every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks we would meet, but it would alternate between US time and or EU US time and Japan US time, or Japan EU time, so that sort of everyone has a chance to participate without adding too much burden for everyone. I think that's probably the easiest, and if need be, we can always change these things. If we don't need a meeting every 2 weeks to make progress, that's fine. I mean, in reality, it will be every 4 weeks for people, then, assuming they're only attending 1 call. If we find that there's a great need of not just having Europeans as intermediaries going between the meetings and those that wish to go up very early or very late, then we can add a third meeting to this rotation that would cater to US and Asia collaboration. But we'll see how that evolves going forward. So if there's an appetite, this is what we'll progress with, starting in January. And any views on this? Are we meeting too often? Are we meeting too seldom? Are we meeting at terrible times?
Worth a try.
I like your proposal.
Sorry, what was that?
Just a comment, like, would it be like the same day, like the tooling group is doing, or like every 2 weeks, and then
we would aim for setting up a regular day. I discussed this with Shane Coughlin, and he suggested a day that wouldn't collide with any other regular OpenChain meetings and other industry events. So so he suggested a day. I just can't remember, but it would be the same day. That would be the intent, unless we have sort of a strong reason to move something.
I'm just wondering, because for example, the tooling, I don't know, have you been joining those, but it's, you know, the Wednesday morning, and then there's another call same Wednesday in the evening. So is this the plan,
I
or?
guess that's one thing we could do.
Yeah.
That's something I didn't really consider as an alternative. So that's a very good point. Perhaps we'll arrange things that way. Actually, yeah. I just figured that this would give sort of more time to work between the meetings. We'll see. Let's bring it up for sort of a discussion on the mailing list, which one there is an appetite for. I think both has sort of merits to them. Of course, the benefit is that if I'm sharing the meetings, it's very much more fresh in my mind if I had a meeting in the morning and then I relay what was said in the afternoon, and for some people can also join both of them. So I think there's a benefit to that. Then with the other alternative, it's the benefit that you know, if people take on homework, or if people would like time to think between the meetings, it would be allowed under that as well. So that's something we'll carry with us, and we'll ask the question on the mailing list. So there is a mailing list for this. I think it's published on the OpenChain site. If it's not, or if you're not able to join it due to some shenanigans with the mailing list, please let Shane know and he'll add you manually. He had to do that for me. I had some issue with my email filter, apparently, that wouldn't send me the confirmation emails. I couldn't join. But with that, I think we're on the top of the hour. I'm cognizant of people's time, but I can stay on for a few more minutes if there's something we'd like to discuss. Any other business, as it's called, an agenda point. Hearing none, I think that we can close the meeting. Thank you all for your time, and thank you for sharing so freely of your experiences, your thoughts, and valuable input to this. Hopefully, it feels like it feels validating from this call, at least, that you know it's a problem that others are seeing. And hopefully it's a problem that we can then, you know, work together to solve, because the solution doesn't have to be that hard, right? We don't have to reinvent SPDX. We just have to agree on how to use SPDX or anything else. It's just agreeing on a format and then following that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
You,
and for those of you in the US, a happy Thanksgiving week next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Hey, dope.
Bye.